The sun was dipping low over the endless prairie, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, when he appeared at the edge of the dusty path. His silhouette was a steady and quiet danger, broad-shouldered, lean with the kind of strength that seemed forged by the land itself. The wind tousled his dark hair, and the faint glint of worn leather straps hinted at stories carried silently on his back. He watched her from a distance, an unreadable expression in his sharp eyes, and something in his gaze made the air between them tremble. She didn't know whether to fear him or be drawn to him, and in that hesitation her heartbeat betrayed her. Her name was Lark, a woman of fire and spirit, raised among the rolling hills and hidden valleys where the world still remembered the old ways. She walked with a grace that came from years of navigating hard land and harder hearts, yet even she felt the pull of this stranger's presence, the unspoken promise that he carried danger and desire in equal measure. The way he lingered at the edge of her vision made the wind feel heavier, the prairie quieter, as if the world itself held its breath. When he finally stepped closer, his voice was low, almost a whisper that rolled over her like a shadow at dusk. He warned her softly, "When I use my tongue on you, you'll beg to stay." It wasn't a threat. Exactly, not the kind that would force her to flee. It was something darker, more tantalizing, a certainty in the way he spoke, a certainty that unsettled her in ways she had never known. She turned sharply, her eyes meeting his, and found only the calm of a storm waiting to break. The path they stood on was lined with wildflowers bending to the fading wind, and the smell of sun-warmed earth filled the space between them. There was a rhythm to the silence, a pulse that matched her own quickening heartbeat, and she realized with a start that she had been holding her breath. She had felt the tension in the prairie before, the promise of rain or fire, but never a tension so human, so precise that it seemed drawn from the deepest parts of the soul. He introduced himself with no fanfare, only a glance that seemed to see through her carefully guarded composure. "Call me Flint," he said, and the name carried a hardness, like stone struck in the dark. Flint moved with the kind of ease that spoke of long miles on horseback, of nights spent beneath stars too vast to name. His presence was a story in itself, one she could neither write nor erase. She wanted to speak, to ask him why he had come, but words tangled in her throat, unspoken and heavy. Lark sensed the tension in the air wasn't just hers alone. The prairie seemed to hum around them, whispering secrets in the rush of wind through tall grass. She had been alone for a long while, shaping her life with the rhythm of seasons and the safety of familiar roads. Yet something about Flint's presence shifted everything she knew. There was an edge to him, a rawness, but also a magnetic pull that made her want to step closer, despite every instinct warning her to step back. He watched her the way a hawk might circle the fields, precise and unyielding. "You don't know what you want yet," he said, his voice dropping so low she could feel it vibrating in the air. "But soon you'll understand." There was no cruelty in his words, only a strange sort of promise that left her heart hammering in her chest. The kind of promise that made the sun seem colder, the shadows longer, the wind sharper against her skin. Around them, the world carried on with a deceptive calm. A creek whispered over stones a few paces away, and distant hills rolled under a sky bleeding into night. Yet in that moment, Lark felt the prairie shrink around the two of them, compressing the space into something intimate, dangerous, and undeniable. Every instinct told her to turn and walk away, to leave the stranger to the roads and dust he had come from, yet every fiber of her being wanted to see how far the story could stretch. He stepped closer, boots kicking up small puffs of dirt, and for the first time she saw the small marks along his arm scars and scratches that spoke of survival, battles fought with the land and with men who underestimated him. There was a history etched into his skin, one that made the shadows of the prairie feel like a stage for secrets yet untold. Lark found herself drawn to it, to him, to the unspoken narrative in his quiet strength. "You'll learn," Flint said again, softer this time, almost a caress in the words. "You'll learn things you didn't think possible." She wanted to ask what he meant, but the weight of his presence made her hesitant. He had a pull unlike anyone she had ever met, a mixture of wild earth and silent fire that stirred something deep within her. She wondered what it would be like to give in, just for a moment, to the pull she could not name. The wind shifted suddenly, lifting strands of her hair across her face, and she caught herself glancing away, pretending to watch the prairie rather than the man who had walked into her life like a storm. Flint followed her gaze, reading her hesitation, and his expression softened not entirely, but enough to unsettle her further. There was a patience in him that was almost predatory, a quiet understanding that she could not escape, no matter how far she ran in thought or imagination. And then he did something she had not expected. He lowered his voice to the gentlest whisper, leaning just enough that the faint scent of leather, earth, and something undefinable reached her. "What comes next?" he said. "You'd never imagine." The words were not a promise she could refuse, nor a threat she could fight. They hung in the air, heavy and full, and for the first time, Lark felt a thrill of fear intertwined with something far more compelling, anticipation. She took a step back, trying to summon reason, but the prairie around them seemed to lean in, to conspire with Flint in holding her in place. The sky darkened in shades of violet and deep amber, and the first stars began to prick the evening canvas. She knew she had a choice: walk away and leave the story unfinished, or stay and let the unknown sweep her into a current that could change everything. The moment stretched, suspended between sun and night, between caution and desire. Flint's eyes held her, unblinking, unreadable, and yet she felt seen in a way no one had ever looked at her before. The tension between them was electric, a spark that could ignite or consume, and in that instant, Lark realized the prairie would never feel the same. Then he tilted his head slightly, a small smirk touching the corner of his mouth, and she knew the next steps would be irreversible. She didn't yet know what awaited her, only that it was close, palpable, inevitable. Every fiber of her being whispered both warning and yearning. And as Flint turned toward the path that led deeper into the heart of the hills, the wind carrying secrets through the tall grass, Lark took a step forward, drawn to the unknown in a way she could not resist. And in that moment the prairie held its breath. The sun dipped below the horizon, and her story was just beginning. The prairie grew darker with every step, the horizon melting into shades of indigo and shadow. Flint led the way down a narrow trail, the kind only someone who knew the land like the back of his hand could follow. Lark's boots pressed into the dry soil, her mind spinning with questions she dared not voice. Every glance she stole at him only deepened the pull she felt, a pull that was both thrilling and terrifying. He didn't speak much, yet every movement he made carried intention, a story she could only guess at. "I've been through these hills before," Flint said finally, breaking the silence. His voice carried a gravelly warmth, a sound that made the wind around them feel softer. "But not like this. Not with someone who might change everything." He didn't explain what he meant, and the vagueness only made Lark's pulse quicken. She wanted answers, yet she found herself reluctant to demand them. Some mysteries, she realized, were intoxicating in their very uncertainty. Lark thought of her life before this moment. She had grown up in the small town of Red Hollow, a place of wooden porches, dusty streets, and endless sky. Life there had been simple but harsh, shaped by the seasons and the stubbornness of those who called it home. Her father, a stern but fair man, had taught her how to ride, shoot, and survive when the weather turned against them. Her mother, who had passed years earlier, had left her a legacy of courage wrapped in gentleness, a courage she had carried into adulthood. Yet Flint made her question all of it, made her feel as if the life she had known was merely the warm-up to the storm that had just arrived. They moved through a stand of cottonwood trees, their leaves whispering in the evening wind. Flint's pace never faltered, but there was a subtle tension in the way his eyes scanned the horizon, as if he were expecting someone or something. Lark noticed the slight twitch of his jaw, the way his fingers brushed against the worn leather of his satchel. Every detail screamed experience, danger, and a past he wasn't ready to share. She had seen men like him before in stories, legends told around campfires, but never in person. There was something magnetic about Flint, something that made it impossible to look away even when she wanted to. "Why are you here?" she asked finally, her voice breaking the spell between them for the briefest moment. The question came out softer than she intended, almost a whisper, but it made Flint glance at her. His eyes, dark and sharp, held a flicker of something unspoken, a mixture of amusement and caution. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted. "But the land called me and I followed, And now, I think it called me to you. His words weren't poetic, not in the traditional sense, but they carried weight, a gravity that made Lark shiver. She wasn't used to being spoken to like that, as if her very presence could alter the course of a man's life. Yet Flint made it feel natural, inevitable. As they descended into a narrow valley, the prairie opened into a hidden glade, a place where wildflowers clung to the edges of a small creek. The water reflected the fading light in silvery streaks, and the air smelled of damp earth and growing things. Flint stopped, turning to face her fully for the first time. The shadows played across his features, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw and the intensity in his eyes. "This place, it's safe," he said, almost more to himself than to her. For now, his words hinted at something deeper, a history she couldn't yet touch. Lark felt a flicker of unease mingled with curiosity. Safe? How could anything involving Flint ever be safe? And yet, in the quiet of the glade, she felt a strange sense of peace. A fragile, fleeting sense that the world outside this moment might not exist. She stepped closer, drawn to him despite the unease twisting in her stomach. "You move through the land like you belong to it," she said, more as an observation than a question. "Like you've been part of it for years?" Flint's eyes softened for the first time, and a small, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips. "I've been through more than a few storms," he said. "And I've learned how to survive them, but some things no amount of experience can prepare you for." He let the sentence hang, unfinished, and Lark felt the weight of it pressing against her chest. The air between them crackled with a tension that had little to do with the wind. She wanted to know what he meant, wanted to ask about the storms, the past, the secrets he carried. But each question felt like it might push her further into the unknown, and she was already teetering on the edge. Something about Flint demanded trust, even if that trust frightened her more than she cared to admit. The creek murmured between them, a gentle sound that contrasted with the tension in Flint's posture. Lark's thoughts drifted to the stories she had grown up hearing about travelers and outlaws in these parts, men who came with fire in their eyes and left with hearts changed forever. Flint felt like one of those stories, alive and breathing, yet undeniably real. She couldn't stop herself from studying him, noticing the strength in his arms, the ease in his stance, the way he seemed entirely at home in the wild. "Do you ever stop running?" she asked softly, more to the wind than to him. Flint's gaze shifted, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. "I stopped once," he said quietly, "for a night, but the land, it doesn't let you stay in one place for long. Not when it has plans of its own." There was a hint of sadness in his voice, a shadow behind the strength that made Lark want to know everything, to reach past the mystery and touch the man beneath. For a moment they stood in silence, the glade around them alive with the hum of insects and the distant call of a hawk. Lark felt herself leaning toward him without realizing it, the pull of his presence as undeniable as the river at their feet. There was something about Flint that made the ordinary world fade, that made the prairie, the hills, even the fading sky feel like mere backdrop to the story unfolding between them. "I should go," she said finally, more out of instinct than desire, yet the words felt hollow even as they left her lips. She didn't want to go, not when Flint stood there like a storm waiting to break. "You don't have to," he said, stepping closer. His presence was overwhelming, a force of nature that left her breathless and unsettled. "Not yet. Not until you're ready." The words were soft, careful, yet filled with an unspoken promise that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts scatter. The wind shifted again, carrying with it a chill that hinted at the coming night. Shadows lengthened across the glade, stretching toward them like fingers of the dark. Lark's heart beat faster, caught between the desire to follow the pull of the unknown and the instinct to protect herself from the danger she could sense in Flint's eyes. And then, just as she opened her mouth to say something, anything, the sound of distant hooves echoed through the valley. Flint stiffened, his eyes narrowing, muscles coiling like a panther ready to spring. Lark's breath caught in her throat as he moved to the edge of the glade, peering into the gathering darkness. "They're here," he muttered, almost under his breath. "And they've been looking for me longer than you've been alive." His hand hovered over the satchel at his side, and the weight of the moment pressed down on them both. Lark realized, with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, that nothing in her life had prepared her for this. Nothing, not the prairie, not the quiet of Red Hollow, not even the stories she had grown up hearing, could match the intensity of what was unfolding before her eyes. The hooves grew louder, a steady rhythm against the earth, and Flint's gaze never left the shadowed trail beyond the trees. Lark felt the pull of the unknown tighten around her chest, a mixture of fear, longing, and undeniable curiosity. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: her life, and the quiet world she had known, had just been irreversibly changed. And as Flint's hand tightened on his satchel and the first shapes emerged from the darkening path, the prairie seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm to break. The shapes emerging from the trail were men on horseback, their faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats, dust kicking up around their boots as they rode with a steady purpose. Flint's body tensed, every muscle coiled like a spring, yet he didn't move recklessly. He had faced men like these before, but something in their approach carried a quiet menace, a precision that spoke of planning and intent. Lark instinctively pressed closer behind him, her hand brushing against the worn leather of his satchel, seeking reassurance she wasn't sure she deserved. "They know my name," Flint muttered, eyes narrowing. "Long before anyone should have. They'd been tracking me for months." There was a subtle urgency in his voice, but it wasn't panic. Panic never helped. Flint had always relied on control, on reading the land and the people in it, and yet Lark could sense that the danger now stretched beyond the edges of the hills and glades they had called safe. The riders slowed as they entered the glade, circling like predators, testing the boundaries of a prey they could almost feel but not fully see. Flint stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the satchel. Lark's breath caught. The tension in the air was a physical thing, pressing against her chest, filling her ears with the silent rhythm of fear and anticipation. "Who's out there?" she asked softly, almost a whisper, but Flint's eyes didn't leave the approaching men. "They're called the Hawthorne Riders," he said, finally letting a flicker of his past surface. "Not a gang in the usual sense. They don't steal, they don't kill indiscriminately, but they make sure no one forgets who controls what passes through these lands. And I crossed them once, a long time ago." His jaw tightened, and for the first time Lark glimpsed the weight of memory pressing on him. The past wasn't just a story Flint carried. It was a living, breathing shadow, and now it had caught up. Lark wanted to step forward, to ask him more, to demand the story she already felt she deserved, but Flint shook his head slightly. "Not here." "Not now?" His gaze swept the glade, calculating the distance, the cover, the advantage. Lark understood immediately. This wasn't about them being brave or reckless. This was about survival. And Flint always survived. The Hawthorne Riders moved closer, and Lark's attention shifted to the tension between them. Their leader, a tall man with a scar running down the side of his face, dismounted and stepped forward, boots crunching against the dirt. Flint mirrored him, standing tall, unwavering, even as the men's presence pressed against the glade like an encroaching storm. "Flint," the leader said, voice low and dangerous, "we know you're here. The debts you carry aren't yours alone to pay." The words carried accusation, history, and a weight that made Lark shiver. Flint's eyes flicked to Lark for a split second, a silent warning in the way he held her gaze, before returning to the man confronting him. "These debts," Flint said evenly, "don't belong to anyone but the men who created them. I won't let you drag someone innocent into them." There was fire beneath his calm, a protective edge sharpened over years of living on the knife's edge. Lark realized with a sudden chill that the danger wasn't just physical. The conflicts in Flint's past had roots deep in power, control, and reputation, a world she had only glimpsed from the outskirts. The leader's eyes narrowed, and a tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the whisper of the creek and the soft rustle of cottonwood leaves. Flint's hand brushed again against the satchel, and Lark noticed the small dagger strapped inside, its hilt worn but deadly. She realized he was ready for what was coming, even as she felt herself caught in the currents of fear and fascination that swirled around him. "I didn't think you'd return to these lands," the leader said finally, his voice carrying the weight of accusation and disbelief. "No one survives what you've done." "Not without consequences." Flint's lips tightened. And Lark saw a shadow cross his normally steady eyes, a shadow of regret, of things done and impossible to undo. "They were my choices," Flint said quietly. "I accept them, but I won't let anyone else suffer for them." Lark felt the depth of his conviction pressing against her heart. Here was a man defined not just by his strength or skill, but by his code, his unshakable sense of what was right. And somehow, even in the midst of danger, she felt drawn to it. The tension between them stretched the evening thin, a wire straining under weight. Lark noticed the way Flint's stance shifted subtly, the way his eyes darted to hidden paths and cover points she hadn't noticed. His awareness was total, complete, a predator and a protector rolled into one. She found herself instinctively stepping closer, even as fear urged her to stay back. Something in the way he carried danger like armor, rather than a burden, made her feel both safe and alive in ways she couldn't explain. And then, without warning, a horse neighed sharply, breaking the fragile balance in the glade. One of the Hawthorne riders had misstepped, kicking a rock into the creek. Flint's eyes snapped to the movement, and in a blur he shifted, stepping between Lark and the approaching danger. She felt the instinctive pull of his energy, a magnetic shield that left her breathless and uncertain. "You need to stay behind me," he said softly, almost a whisper that carried more authority than any shouted command could. Lark's stomach tightened, not with fear alone, but with the undeniable intimacy of the moment. Here was Flint, standing between her and the world, his presence overwhelming, protective, and magnetic. She wanted to argue, to step forward, but the look in his eyes silenced her completely. The night pressed closer around them, and Lark noticed how the shadows played tricks, turning the glade into a maze of uncertainty. Flint's movements were precise, controlled, and deliberate. Yet there was a tension in every muscle, a readiness that hinted at the danger they could not yet see fully. The Hawthorne riders shifted, regrouping, their intentions clear. They had come for Flint, but the glade and the woman who had unexpectedly become part of his world complicated everything. For a moment, Lark felt the pull of conflicting emotions, fear, awe, curiosity, and something more primal, more intimate. Flint was dangerous, yes, but in a way that drew her closer, a way that made the edges of the prairie feel charged with possibility. She realized, with a thrill she couldn't suppress, that she was no longer just a witness to this story. She was part of it now, bound by proximity, danger, and the magnetic pull of Flint himself. The leader of the riders narrowed his eyes and spoke again, low and sharp. "This ends tonight, Flint. There's nowhere left to run." Flint didn't flinch. His gaze flicked once more to Lark, the faintest hint of a warning, and then back to the men. "Running isn't the answer," he said calmly. "Confronting it is." His words were simple, but the weight behind them told of years of experience, of battles fought and choices made in the shadows. Lark's pulse raced as she realized the truth. The conflict wasn't just about Flint's past or the debts he carried. It was about choices, survival, and the lines drawn between right and wrong in a world where every decision could mean life or death. And somewhere, in the tension stretching the glade thin, she sensed the beginning of something far more complicated, something that went beyond danger, beyond revenge, beyond survival. She stepped closer, almost instinctively, and Flint's gaze softened ever so slightly. Not in weakness, but in acknowledgement of the connection forming between them, fragile and electric. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The air between them carried enough unspoken words to fill a lifetime. Lark realized with both excitement and apprehension that whatever came next, they would face it together or be torn apart by it. And then the wind shifted again, carrying with it a sound Lark didn't expect, a faint whistle, almost like a signal, echoing through the valley. Flint's eyes narrowed, muscles coiling like a spring ready to strike. The Hawthorne riders tensed as well, the balance of power shifting in a heartbeat. Lark felt her stomach knot, the electric tension twisting tighter, as if the night itself held its breath. The prairie had become a stage for danger, desire, and secrets waiting to be revealed. And Lark knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that nothing about this night or Flint would ever be the same again. The whistle cut through the night like a blade, sharp and deliberate. Flint's hand tightened on the strap of his satchel as he scanned the darkened valley, the shadows of the Hawthorne riders stretching long and menacing. Lark felt the air thicken around them, every nerve alive, every instinct screaming that this night would change everything. She clutched the edge of Flint's coat without thinking, the warmth of his body grounding her even as the danger pressed in. "They know the land," Flint muttered, almost to himself, his eyes scanning the trees and hills for paths of retreat. "They move like they've been through these valleys before." His jaw tightened. And for the first time, Lark saw a shadow of vulnerability pass over his usually steady face. Flint had always been in control, but tonight the stakes felt higher than anything she had imagined. The leader of the riders stepped forward again, boots crunching over the dry leaves. "Flint," he called, voice steady and cold. "You've hidden long enough. There's no running from what you owe. And no one gets out without paying their share." Lark caught the gleam of a pistol at his hip, the metallic promise of danger. She could feel the tension coil in the glade, a force that made her chest tight, her breath shallow. Flint moved slightly, shielding her with a presence that seemed larger than life, a combination of strength, determination, and something unspoken that drew her closer. "I don't answer to you," he said quietly, firmly. "And I don't let anyone else take the consequences for my choices." The words hung in the night, resonating with a power that made Lark's pulse race. This was a man who had fought ghosts and shadows before, and yet the fight now was more personal, more urgent, more alive than anything he had faced alone. The riders shifted, unease flickering across their faces. Lark sensed the change instantly. The leader's calm control had cracks. Flint's experience, his sheer presence, had turned the balance, even as the night held its breath around them. She realized, with a thrill that mingled fear and admiration, that Flint wasn't just a man of strength. He was a man who shaped the world around him by sheer force of will and courage. Then the wind shifted again, bringing another sound, the soft snap of a twig, the faint rustle of movement beyond the glade. Flint's eyes darted, calculating, ready. Lark's heart pounded, the pull of danger mingling with the magnetic intensity of the man before her. She wanted to ask questions, to know the stories behind the scars and the past he carried so carefully, but the present demanded attention. The moment didn't belong to curiosity. It belonged to survival, to strategy, to the unspoken tension that could ignite at any second. "Move," Flint whispered, almost imperceptibly, guiding her behind the cover of a low rock and a cluster of shrubs. Lark obeyed without hesitation, marveling at his control, his quiet authority. The way he commanded the situation, even as the unknown pressed in from every angle, was mesmerizing. She had felt attraction before, yes, but this was more than attraction. It was awe, trust, and a danger that electrified every nerve in her body. The riders hesitated at the edge of the glade, their voices low, their movements careful. Lark saw the tension in Flint's eyes, the flicker of strategy, and she realized that he wasn't just waiting for them to act. He was shaping the battlefield in silence, reading every shadow, every line of sight, every footfall. She could see the depth of his skill, honed over years of navigating the unforgiving prairie, surviving storms, men, and choices that could have broken any other person. A sudden movement, a shadow detaching itself from the tree line, made her gasp. Flint reacted instantly, stepping in front of her, muscles taut, ready. The air was alive with the smell of dust and wildflowers, mingled with the faint metallic tang of the night. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. His presence alone was a shield, a warning, a promise. Lark felt the heat of it, the magnetic pull that made her stomach twist in anticipation and fear. "Stay close," he said finally, voice low and steady. "No matter what happens, stay close." She nodded, unable to form words. Her trust in him absolute even as the danger pressed in from all sides. The Hawthorne riders were skilled, relentless, and clearly not strangers to Flint's tactics, but the air of inevitability around him was palpable. He moved as if the land itself were an extension of his body, every motion deliberate, every instinct precise. The night deepened, shadows stretching longer, twisting around them. Flint led her deeper into the glade, the sound of hooves behind them echoing faintly like a warning drumbeat. Lark realized she had never felt more alive, more aware of every breath, every heartbeat, every subtle shift in the air. The danger sharpened her senses, but so did Flint's presence, his steady strength a tether in the storm. Suddenly, the leader of the riders called out again, his voice carrying across the valley. "Flint, you can't hide forever. Your debt's end tonight." There was a weight in the words, a history she didn't fully understand, but the intensity was clear. Flint's jaw tightened, his hand brushing again against the satchel at his side. There was something inside, she realized, more than mere tools or weapons. It carried history, secrets, and perhaps even a key to surviving the night ahead. Flint's gaze flicked to her briefly, a flash of something softer passing across his normally uncheckable face. Lark felt it like a current through her chest, a pull that made the night's tension both terrifying and intoxicating. He had warned her before, yes, he had spoken words that had made her heartbeat stutter, but now the full weight of those words pressed down on her. The pull between them was undeniable, electric, dangerous, and inescapable. The riders moved closer, their shadows long and deliberate. Flint positioned himself between Lark and the approaching danger, every line of his body a barrier, a shield, a silent promise. Lark's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the night stretching, waiting, holding its breath. This was the moment the past and the present collided, the point where decisions, courage, and trust would be tested like never before. A sudden crack of a branch, the sound of leather shifting, and Flint's eyes flicked to the movement. "Now," he whispered, and it wasn't just a command. It was an anchor, a lifeline. Lark's instincts screamed to follow, to move, to trust, as she did, the fear and attraction twisting together into a force she couldn't resist. The riders hesitated, uncertainty flickering in their eyes, and Flint seized the moment. Every muscle, every thought, every instinct moved in perfect synchronization. Lark realized she was witnessing a man at the height of his skill, a man whose past battles had shaped him into someone both unyielding and utterly magnetic. And even as the danger pressed in, even as the tension reached its peak, she felt herself drawn to him, to the promise he carried, to the unspoken words and touch that lingered in every glance. The night had become a stage for something larger than both of them, danger. Desire, history, and destiny all colliding under the vast prairie sky. Lark knew with sudden clarity that whatever happened next would change everything. The pull between them, the threat of the riders, the weight of Flint's past, all of it built to a moment she could feel in her bones, a climax of tension, anticipation, and longing. And then, just as the first shot of conflict seemed inevitable, Flint turned to her, eyes blazing with intensity and something tender beneath it. "Hold on," he said softly, almost reverently. "Everything you feared, everything you've wanted, it's coming, and you'll need to trust me." Lark's breath caught. The wind seemed to pause, the prairie holding its own breath. The riders closed in, the tension reached its peak, and every heartbeat felt like the drumbeat of destiny. She realized, with a thrill that mingled fear and anticipation, that nothing in her life would ever be the same. Flint had become her anchor, her storm, and the pull of the night wrapped them together in a story that had only just begun. The night had grown heavy with tension, every shadow in the glade seeming to hold its own threat. Flint's eyes never left the Hawthorne riders, his body taut, ready to move at a moment's notice. Lark's hand brushed against his sleeve instinctively, grounding herself in his presence. She had followed him through danger, through uncertainty, through a world that felt larger and wilder than anything she had known. And now, at the edge of the final confrontation, she felt something shift. Flint moved like a shadow among the trees, his steps deliberate, measured, and precise. Lark followed, trusting him completely, though her pulse still thundered with the intensity of the moment. The riders had surrounded them, but Flint had a plan, one born of experience, instinct, and the intimate knowledge of these lands. He led them to the narrow banks of the creek, where rocks and fallen branches provided cover, where the moonlight danced across the water in silvery patterns. "Stay close," he whispered, voice low but commanding. "Trust me." "I won't let them." His words were cut short by a sudden shout from the riders, the sound sharp against the quiet of the night. Flint's hand went to the satchel at his side, and Lark felt the weight of what was coming, the culmination of every choice, every risk they had taken to reach this point. The riders advanced, and Flint met them head-on, his movements a combination of strategy and instinct. Lark watched, breathless, as he deflected, parried, and maneuvered with a skill that seemed almost supernatural. She felt her chest tighten with a mixture of fear, admiration, and the undeniable pull she had felt from the moment he first appeared on the prairie. This man was danger and safety all at once, a force she couldn't resist even if she tried. One of the riders lunged too close, and Flint's hand struck out, sending the man stumbling back. Lark flinched, but Flint's eyes were calm, focused, unshakable. He moved to shield her, positioning himself between her and the threat with a protective precision that left no room for doubt. Lark felt her heart swell with a mixture of love and awe. She had followed him through fear, through uncertainty, and she had discovered in him a courage and strength that surpassed anything she had imagined. The leader of the Hawthorne riders stepped forward again, tension radiating from every movement. Flint met him, gaze unflinching, voice steady. "It ends here," he said, a promise, a warning, and a declaration all at once. The words carried weight, and Lark felt it in her chest, a tether pulling her closer to him, to the storm and calm he embodied. For a moment time seemed to suspend itself. The glade, the creek, the moonlight, even the wind held its breath. And then the final confrontation unfolded, fast and precise, a dance of movement, strategy, and unspoken understanding. Flint moved like he was part of the land itself, every step, every turn, every motion a testament to the years of survival and wisdom he carried. Lark held her ground, close behind him, her presence a silent support, a heartbeat shared in perfect synchronization with his own. In the end, it was not brute force alone that decided the outcome. Flint's knowledge of the land, his patience, his ability to anticipate, and his unwavering focus brought the balance back into their favor. The riders, exhausted and cornered, realized the futility of pressing further. The leader's eyes met Flint's one last time, a grudging respect passing in the silence of the night. "It's over," Flint said softly, lowering his hand. His eyes swept over the glade, then returned to Lark, softer now, warmer. "For tonight, for everything that matters." Lark felt a rush of relief and exhilaration, the tension that had gripped her chest finally easing, replaced by a profound sense of closeness and trust. They stepped together to the edge of the creek, the moonlight reflecting across the water and illuminating the quiet aftermath. Flint reached for her hand, fingers intertwining with hers, and Lark realized with a smile that the fear and uncertainty had only deepened the bond between them. In his presence, she had discovered not only courage, but a love that felt as expansive and wild as the prairie itself. "I thought I'd lost everything once," Flint said quietly, voice low and intimate. "But you remind me what's worth holding on to." Lark felt a warmth spread through her chest, a realization that they had both been shaped by the past, by the choices they made, by the dangers they had faced. And now, together, they could begin to shape the future. The riders had retreated into the darkness, leaving only the whisper of the wind through the cottonwood leaves. Flint turned fully to her, eyes searching hers, and for the first time he allowed himself a small, genuine smile. Lark returned it, the shared understanding between them deep and unspoken. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and the shadows of the past, and yet they had emerged stronger, united, and full of a possibility that neither had dared hope for before. "Let's leave this place," Flint said, voice low, carrying both determination and tenderness. "We'll find a home somewhere the prairie feels like ours, a place where danger doesn't shadow every step." Lark nodded, feeling a surge of excitement and peace. The journey had been wild, uncertain, and full of tension, but now there was a promise of something enduring, a life shaped not just by survival, but by trust, love, and shared courage. They walked together through the glade, side by side, the moonlight guiding their path. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, reflecting the new beginning forming between them. Flint's hand brushed hers occasionally, a touch that spoke volumes in its subtlety, reminding her of the bond they had forged through every trial, every shadow, every heartbeat of fear and exhilaration. As the prairie stretched ahead, open and vast, Lark felt a sense of freedom she had never known. The past, with all its debts, dangers, and uncertainties, had been faced and survived. The present was theirs, filled with the quiet power of trust, the thrill of a connection that could not be broken, and the gentle warmth of a love both wild and steadfast. Flint stopped at a hill overlooking the valley, the land bathed in the soft glow of the rising sun. He pulled Lark close, the wind carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth. "Whatever comes next," he whispered. "We face it together." Lark rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart, and realized that the story she had feared would end in danger had instead opened a new chapter, one full of hope, passion, and a love as enduring as the prairie itself. The hawthorn riders were gone, the danger dissipated, and the land around them seemed to exhale. Flint and Lark stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, letting the silence speak the words that neither needed to say aloud. Every scar, every shadow, every challenge they had faced had led them here, to a place of trust, safety, and a shared future. "I never imagined this," Lark said softly, lifting her gaze to meet his. "I never imagined someone like you, someone like us." Her words trailed off, carried away by the wind, but the meaning was clear. Flint's smile deepened, his hand brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You've changed everything," he replied. "Not just for me, but for this life, this land, this story we're building together." The prairie stretched endlessly before them, a symbol of freedom, possibility, and the enduring strength of hearts brave enough to follow love through fear and uncertainty. They stayed on the hill as the sun rose fully, golden light spilling across the valley, illuminating every tree, every stone, every whispering blade of grass. Lark knew that the adventures, the uncertainties, and the stories were far from over, but for the first time she felt ready not just to face them, but to embrace them side by side with Flint, the man who had come like a storm and stayed like the sun. The prairie, the danger, the past, they were all behind them now. What lay ahead was theirs to shape, theirs to claim. And as Flint held her close, the weight of every trial they had endured melting into the warmth of the morning, Lark realized that some stories, the ones worth telling, always end with love, trust, and the quiet triumph of hearts brave enough to meet the unknown together. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying a promise of peace, possibility, and a love that would endure every season, every challenge, every shadow. Flint and Lark stood together, hearts intertwined, ready to face whatever the future held. And for the first time the prairie felt like home.